Hello, hello. Welcome to today's Fall for Watercolor art class. Today we are talking about my absolute favorite technique. That is the glaze technique. And this is, oh, here, let me say hi. Let me get it off my, here we go. There we go. Hi. Not showing my face today because I'm feeling a little under the weather and my hair looks crazy. But I'm super excited because today we are going to be painting this leaf. It is going to be so pretty. And let's just kind of, there we go. We can back up a little bit so you can see everything. Well, let's zoom in. I think we need to zoom in. Let's get in there. Okay. Awesome. So for those of you who are here, go ahead and let me know what your favorite fall drink is so I can count your attendance toward your Fall for Watercolor Challenge drawing. So far, we have had a ton of entries, and every bit that you participate in counts toward winning some awesome prizes. Hi, Jessica. Good to see you in here again today. All right, well, let's jump into it. First of all, if you haven't entered the giveaway, make sure that you sign up with the link below. You'll get email notifications of everything. Oh, thanks, Analia, for letting me know. You can see everything, okay? You'll get email notifications for everything that's going on, so definitely sign up with the link below. And I'm sharing like a little watercolor tip every day to that email list too. Okay, so the glaze technique, I've already taken the liberty of drawing these, painting these splotches. So these are totally dry. So the glaze technique requires patience, but I promise you it is worth it. All right, awesome. Tracy is coffee, coffee, coffee every season. Excellent. Same. And we've got warm apple cider, vanilla cappuccino. I'm really thirsty now. Okay, so when we use the glaze technique, we have been talking a lot about doing like wet and wet techniques. So waiting, making sure that the paint is wet when we're interacting with it. But today we're going to do something different where we wait for the paint to dry. Okay, and then that is going to be our base layer. And then when we add the second layer, it is going to really deepen this watercolor. So let's take this green, for example. I'm going to add some pink to it, okay? So here we have the pink without any of the green background, okay? And I'm just doing a nice wash here. So there is that. And you can see it's combining the colors, but if you look closely, you can see some of the green. Let's see if you can you see a little bit of the green in the ridges of the paper? This isn't shiny paint or anything. It's because this watercolor paper has some ridges on it, or some tooth, is what they call it. And that tooth, or the texture of the paper, is allowing us to see a little bit of that green and a little bit of that pinky purple as well. So if we were to mix these colors together on my palette, for example, so, or like wet and wet, let's just kind of do this, and then let's add in some of that green and see what happens. Okay, so it's just going to turn brown, and it's all going to mix together, and you're not going to get that depth, like brown gray, that you get here. So it really just depends on what you're looking for. If you want like a more solid representation of that color, then mixing it while it's wet is a really great option. But if you want to see those remnants of the early layers, which is what I really like doing in my paintings, that lights me up. So I like to do it in the glaze technique. Okay, so another example, we have this blue line, and I'm going to add various amounts of yellow to it, so that we can see how it depends on how much of each color you're adding. So here I'm going to add a lot of yellow on this side, and then I'm going to gradually fade this yellow out. So we're doing like a little variegated wash here of the yellow on top of the solid blue. So you can see the more yellow you use, the more green it's going to look, because blue and yellow make green. The less yellow you use, the more blue it's going to look. So you really get a lot of very cool variety. And once this paint dries, it won't be so shiny, but you can see how, depending on which way you're catching that color, you're seeing both the blue and the yellow throughout. So that's really, really cool. A great exercise to kind of practice this and see what your colors make. Like if you want to kind of take a palette and see what colors everything makes, what you can do is you can take all your colors and make almost like a little weaving. So take all your colors and make a stripe. I'm just going to do a few of them, but you can make a stripe here and then a stripe here. Make sure to leave some room if you're doing it wet because you don't want them to bleed together. And then let's say I have a yellow here for this little limited palette. And this is kind of handy to keep around once you're done with this so that you know what the colors look like when they're glazed together. Okay, so I would wait for these to dry. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to do vertical lines so that I can see how the colors look when they cross over. So we'll do that in a little bit once that has dried. But are you guys ready to get into our painting for today? All right. So I have taken the liberty of drawing this this leaf, but if you want to take a second and kind of sketch it out, some things, oh, I'm going to have to back up because I made this pretty big. Okay, some things that I am noticing about this leaf to take note of are, I don't even know if you can see my sketch, but if here's my little stem, here, I'll make it a little bit darker so you can see. So here's my little stem, okay? And if I look at this leaf, the veins here are pretty much straight across where that stem meets. Okay, and then I have one going straight up out of the stem. And then we have some that are kind of like right in the middle, in between those, dissecting those 90-degree angles. And so that's going to give me the guideline for my basic veins in my leaf. And then you can see at the bottom edge of that little at the leaf, there's like a little tiny leaf that comes down here, like a little tiny leaf sprig, I don't know, wrinkle, whatever you want to call it, point that comes down here. And then we're just going to give it some lines as we make our way to the top point of each of those, each of the tips of the leaves. And so another thing you want to note is that when we get into the sections between the leaves, it's about maybe about halfway down the branching veins. Okay. And so I'm doing the same on the other side, making sure that it comes to the highest point where the vein ends. And then kind of going around my leaf. And you don't want these to be too perfect, right? Because nature is not perfect. So if it looks a little wonky, great, perfect. That's perfect. Like this one, I'm making the leaf kind of bend in over here. And that's totally okay. You make it however you want. If it matches the one that's on the page, great. If you're just using that as a guiding point, then that's fine too. Because really what we're focusing on is the glaze technique, not the like exact realistic portrayal of this specific leaf, because this is just scrapped from Google. So, all right. So what we're going to do first is we are going to look at this leaf and look for the absolute lightest color. Does anybody in the chat have a guess of what color we are going to do first on this leaf? Curious. I know there's a little bit of a lag. We're going to be looking for the lightest color. All right. Okay, you guys are feeling shy. That's okay. So it's going to be yellow. So I'm going to mix up a nice big paint puddle of yellow, like a warm, bright yellow. I'm using my new Gamboge. Oh, looks like I need to clear a little room on my palette here. This is pretty messy. Yeah, new Gamboge. That's right. Ooh, look, very specific. Yeah, so whatever yellow you have is great. And you're probably going to want to use a pretty big brush for this. I'm going to be using my size 10 silver black velvet brush to make sure that we are getting good coverage. And we don't have to worry about making sure it stays wet because we're not doing wet and wet in this case. What we do want to make sure, though, is that we don't have any weird drying lines. So as you work your way across doing a big wash, one thing that's really helpful is making sure that you move across your page in a way that you're not going to let any weird dry lines happen. So like if I were to do this leaf and leave that here and then start over here, this edge might dry. And then when I try to connect it to the other part that's painted, it would leave a really bizarre line. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do that so that you can see what it looks like when that happens. So I'll start over here. Pretend I got distracted. Very realistic scenario. Like, ooh, I'm going to paint over here. Another pro tip is if you're right-handed, start in the upper left-hand corner. If you're left-handed, start in the upper right-hand corner so you're not dragging your hand through the paint. Okay? Yummy. I love that new Gamboge. So pretty. Okay. So we're just letting that edge dry, but you don't do that. You let yours, you try to keep it all nice and even. So one way, if you're noticing that one of your edges is kind of starting to get dry, I just add in like a little boop of paint there and water. So I kind of hydrate that edge so it has a little extra time. It gives me like kind of adds some time to my clock here so that I have time to get back to that area. So I'll just kind of keep checking on this line. Woo, goodness gracious. Okay, well, I grabbed the wrong color, but that's okay. I will say my hands are really shaky today. I've been feeling under the weather. And so if my painting is kind of shaky, oops, I forgot we were not connecting that. If my hands are kind of shaky and everything looks crazy, that's why. All right, so I'm filling this up. And I'm making sure my edge is hydrated over here. Just adding a little bit of extra water. I can always redistribute that paint later, but I can't get it wet once it's already dried. Okay, let's see here. Lovely. All right. And you'll see the stem is totally red, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to put yellow underneath it. It does have like a very bright red. So in order to make sure that the painting has like a full, robust look, I like to make sure that if you're glazing part of it, every part should be glazed. Okay, so here we're getting to this line, and I don't know, it wasn't quite totally dry, but can you see how there's a little bit of a line here? Let's see if we can zoom in. I don't know, maybe it's actually been okay, but there's just a slight edge line where that's dried. So, oh, do I have I don't know, I thought I had a little hair there. So if this is the case, it's probably still wet enough that I can wiggle my brush over it and make that disappear. But if you can't, that's okay. It's just one of those little happy little accidents that we are going to embrace. Okay, so I've made sure that I've done the whole yellow as my underlayer, even though this ends up being only red right here in the stem. I still want this to be yellow underneath because I want it to have that depth across the whole leaf. Okay, so let's back this up. If you have a drying utensil, go ahead and grab that now. Oop, this leaf should have been like way higher there, but you know what? We're gonna go with it. It's natural. Okay, so I'm gonna blow dry. If you're at home and do not want to hear that, mute your computer. I guess I could mute mine. Here, let me do that. I'll do that. Okay, so I forgot to say if you wanted to do some wet and wet in here, it doesn't have to be a flat wash. You can always add wet and wet techniques and do some cool like color mixing in your first layer if you'd like. I personally just kind of like a base layer to build from, but it is totally up to you. Okay. So what I am seeing is some nice bright red, and then some nice kind of softer oranges. So I'm actually going to add just like a little bit of my new gamboge to that red to brighten it up. And then I see some oranges, so I'm going to make sure I have some orange mixed up. I'm probably going to do my like yellow ochre with like a maroon kind of color. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so here's what I've got going on. I'm gonna red and then this kind of orangey maroon, and then I want like a lighter orange too. So I'm just gonna add like a lot of new gamboge to some of that red that I had already mixed up. Oop, my palette's getting so messy. I need to make room. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at this tip right here, and just get into it. So I'm going to do, what I'll be working on is the red that comes here at the tips of the leaves. And then I'm going to be trying to make sure that I don't hit any of the parts where I see the yellow. But I'm not going to add any of those like details in yet. That's going to be in an additional layer. So let's go ahead and get this red going. I'm just going to follow pretty much just straight up cover this for the very tip of this leaf, prong, or whatever you want to call it, this part of the leaf. And I'm actually going to use my, I think I'm going to use my size 5 brush just to get a little bit more control. The smaller your brush, the more precise you're going to be able to be usually. Okay, so do you see how we can kind of see that yellow underneath, and it's making this really nice, warm, bright red that we're going to turn into an orange. Okay. And I'm just adding water to this edge to make sure this transition is nice and soft. And I'm going to start playing around with where those yellows are. So I see that there's a little bit of yellow where the veins are. And I'm not going to be too like tidy with this either because it doesn't look tidy, you know? So I'm using this middle stem of this leaf to kind of guide where my pen is or where my brush is going and creating these little yellow spaces. So let's do a little bit here. Any chance you have a line that's going to be a little bit harder is a great place when you're working a large area to kind of take your time. Like I'm not too worried if this line dries here because I know I'm going to be painting over it with red later. So it's always good to look for opportunities where you don't have to be as fussy about where it's going to dry. Let me know if you'd like me to kind of go into that further. I think it can be kind of hard to think about that when you're trying a new technique. So don't worry about that too much if that's like, you're like, what the heck is she talking about? Okay, so I'm moving into this next leaf here. And I know I want to stay away from the middle. And this leaf has a lot of really, really cool coloration. And so I'm just gently tapping my brush kind of in this area to give some of that organic feel. If you want these transitions, like if you wanted these lines here to be a little softer, you could always paint over it with just clear and kind of use the lift technique if you wanted it to be a little bit less poignant. Okay, so now let's get into this tip here. Nice and red over here. And I love, love, love how you can see the yellow underneath. Now I'm just wiggling some water along this edge. I don't want it to get too dark. So one thing with watercolor, it's always easy to make it darker, but going lighter once you've already applied paint with watercolor can be a really, really tricky business. So I like to start lighter and I can always add more color in or more depth as I go. Okay, so here, and I know we have some yellow kind of around the base. And this leaf is mostly yellow. It has just like the slightest little tinge of orange to it. So I'm mostly going to keep my orange on the outside, and I'm actually just painting over it with mostly water, just so that we get a little bit of that orangey hint. But I'm not going to worry about those speckles down here. Okay, that's pretty much like all the color that I'm going to add to this leaf. I'm going to keep it mostly just water. Okay, great. So let's do this one. Kind of stopped halfway through this. So let's just get back in there. We've got a lot of orange happening in this little cranny. And again, I'm not going for like perfect replica here. I just want to kind of cover the area with a general sense of what's happening. And I'm okay that this is kind of a harsher dry line. Now, I'm not going to blend that too much because I think when we add the detail later, we'll be able to get some nice texture. I think many times our instinct is to, like what I find a lot when I'm teaching classes and stuff, our instinct is to blend and blend and blend and make everything really smooth. But I think one of the most powerful things you can do when watercoloring is allow for those brush strokes to really sing their siren song. Those brush strokes are going to be like your power move. I read somewhere like good artists are able to make the brush strokes disappear. Great artists use the brush strokes like to create art or something along those lines. And I was like, that is such a great quote. I have to look up who said that because it is, I think about it so often. Like here would be an example. You might be like, oh, I need to blend that a little bit more, that harsh line, but really we're going to just let it shine because that makes a really much more compelling piece. And when we're over blending, we blend by kind of rubbing the paper, right? And working the paper quite a bit. And so if we are blending, the chances of us exhausting the paper is really high. Like you might kind of not be able to get as many layers out of the paper as you might have if you hadn't over blended. Does that, let me know if y'all want more details on that. But I think that's really common. Overblending is definitely something I am always thinking about and working on. So something that if you're wanting to challenge yourself, if you're like, oh, I think I might be overblending too. Something I think about is like, how can I paint this with the fewest amount of brush strokes? Like be really intentional about where you want those highlights to be, those lighter parts. And just, it's going to look weird, but you have to trust the process. I know that's hard. I know it's so hard. But be confident in where you left your light spaces. You'll pull it together and it'll look really cool. I promise. And it kind of drives me crazy seeing the like dry lines where it's just kind of harsh, but I know that I'm going to be happy with it later. So it might be a leap of faith for a little bit, but I'm pretty pleased with that. As you can see, this is nowhere near as dark as what we've got going on in our leaf, right? So we have plenty of room to build on this. I'm just going to do a pretty straightforward stem here. Okay, but this gives us an idea of where our coloration is starting. And we're going to build. That's the beauty of, I think the glaze technique lends itself so well to leaves because leaves are all about this blending. So let's go ahead. I'm going to blow dry a little bit, okay? I'll mute myself, but we want to make sure that we're working on a dry surface. Oop. Okie dokie. Oh, and I have a little treat for those of you all in the live at the end. So make sure you stay because I've got a little surprise for you. Okay. What am I doing I'm putting another layer on. Sorry, Dayquil, silly. Okay, so I'm going to start once again at this top, and I am going back in with my red, and we're going to deepen this layer with yet another glaze. So the glaze, you can go glazing away for as long as your paper will allow it. So this is where higher quality watercolor paper is going to be handy. If you're going to start working with a lot of glazes, you are going to want to invest in some really nice watercolor paper. I really like Arches. I think it holds up to a lot of wear and tear and blending and all that good stuff. So I find that I can get like 4 really, really, really wet layers and then some detail layers. But usually I'm hitting around 7 passes over each of my paintings at least. And not all of them are super juicy wet, but some of them are. And so I find that Arches is what I feel most comfortable with adding on all those layers. Okay. So in this stage, I might actually add in some of those dark discolorations that we're seeing here. So I'm going to grab, I think, some of my blue, and I have like this kind of maroony color. So it's a little purple. I might add some green just to kind of make it a little bit more brown. And then I'm going to add some indigo to darken it. Okay, so here we have a little bit of discoloration here on the tip. Okay. And I might add in just, ooh, okay. So there's a little more water on there than I expected, but this is a great time to add in those softer discoloration spots. Here you'll see this side actually didn't have it and this side did, but I knew this side was too dry to add the wet and wet. So I decided to put it on the other side. Okay, so let's keep working down here. And one thing you'll want to think about is watercolor always dries a lot lighter than what it looks like when it's wet. So as you're considering your layers, you're going to want to think about, okay, yes, I like where this is right now. It's perfect, but then you will probably need another layer if it's perfect when it's dry. Okay. There's like a lot of orange here. It's kind of speckly. Just dab some little orange there. And then I'm just taking my wet brush and dabbing along the edges, making it look a little bit softer. That way it's not, the line isn't as harsh. I'm cleaning up in between. Let's see. Got some nice lines here that I want to preserve. Gotta refill my palette soon. I've been busy this month. Okay. See another little vein line that I'm thinking about here. And if we were doing like a hyper realistic painting, we would be going a lot slower, and we would be doing a lot softer layers and really micromanaging each of these sections. But right now we are just playing with the glaze technique and enjoying the whimsy of this leaf. Okay, so I think I want to add in some brown up at this top section here. Those little tips are where the decay starts. usually. Okay, and we have some little brown moments. Kind of adding that in here and there. And if you watched some of our other videos thinking about like wet and when things are dry, if you don't want things to spread a ton, you might want to wait until it's a little closer to dry. Or if you want to have like a little bit more control over that spread, I guess. Let's see here. And here it's pretty brown, so I'm just bringing that brown directly onto my leaf. And if you need to turn your paper to get a little bit more of the angle that you need, don't be shy. Do it. You don't owe your paper anything to keep it straight, okay? Make it work for you. Okay. Building up these layers. I want to add in a little bit more of that brown there. And I'm just going straight brown here. And then I'm going to fade that in with some red. And notice how I brought that red not right up against the brown, because I want to connect the brown at the last minute so that I have a little bit more control over how that moves. If you do it right next to each other, then those colors are going to blend immediately, and you're going to pull that brown like all the way into the rest of your painting. Okay, and so here I'm starting in the middle and with just water. So it's still pretty light over on this leaf. Let's get some nice oranges happening over here. Okay. And I know we've got some of that yellow we can still see. Remember, we're trusting the process of those veins underneath. I know it looks weird now. I promise you it's going to make sense as I keep going. Okay, let's see. All right. Okay, so we still have these two to do with our second glaze. So this is our third layer of paint that we are putting on this painting. And each time it's getting more and more built up. So that's pretty cool. I'm always like, oh, I'm going to do something like quick and loose. And I'm like, just kidding. I'm going to start building up layers. And then once you start, it's kind of like, okay, well, now I got to do it for the whole painting. And it's like, what have I done? But it's always worth it. I love a layer. What can I say? Okay. So we're going to attend to those little veins there. And the way that I'm leaving those veins yellow is by not painting in that spot. So I am leaving a water barrier there to really preserve that yellow of the layer underneath. Okay, I've got some nice kind of brown, yellowy orange situation happening right here. I'm just allowing my brush to just flit across the page. Here I'm adding a little bit of water to the edges of those shapes to get a little bit more playful and organic looking. All right, let's do a little bit of that just around this edge here. Oop. And I think I probably would have made this, in looking at this now, if I was doing a realistic portrayal, I would probably actually have left a lot more orange on this part of the leaf, but that's okay. Or a lot more yellow. Okay. Let's do a little bit of our little dots. There's a little bit of that dot here. Do that where the wet and wet is happening. Okay. All right. We are getting there. Okay. So actually I might add a little bit of brown in here while it's still wet. Now we could go on doing this layer forever and ever. I mean, at least until our paper was like, please have mercy. But what we are going to do is we are going to dry this one and we're going to go ahead and put the final touches on. So hang on to your hats, folks. I am putting the blow dryer on. Okay, so this next layer is going to be the detail layer. So I usually categorize my paintings into three main sections. So there is the base layer, which is where I just do like my basic washes to kind of get the overall feel of the piece, to get some of that white off the page so it's like less stressful. My second and like third and fourth and fifth and sixth layer is the depth layer. So I will create that depth by adding more layers, more glaze. Then if there's shadow, that's kind of in the depth layer. So I'll add the shadow in, and then I go in at the final stage and do the detail layer. So detail layer is actually usually pretty dry work, maybe metaphorically and actually. So we are not going to be using a ton of water with this section. What we are going to be using is mostly a dry brush. I mean, it has to have some water so we can get some paint, but we're not going to have it like floating around everywhere. So I'm going to start with the veins. These are all really striking red. So I'm using the very tip of my brush as I work my way down into the stem. And I do want a little bit more oomph on the stem. So I'm giving it some texture with a little bit of that paint. Okay, and I'm gonna move my painting around here so I can get a little bit of a better angle. I find pulling down is easier for me when I'm making a straight line. So make sure to like make your painting work for you. You the boss, okay? All right. So let's keep going. I'm just keeping a very light touch. As I said, my hand is a little shaky today. I'm not feeling too hot, so bear with me. It looks like if you look in close at that picture, there's like a little bit of webbing almost at that base where the stem connects. So I'm adding a little bit more red there. And it's pretty deep color, so I want to add that. Okay, now you might notice that there are some little kind of like decay spots. So we've primed our piece for this, but now we're going to add in those little speckly elements. So I'm using my brush, just the tip, to create those little dots that are around some of the edges of our page. So these ones are a little bit more orange. I don't know if I'm loving this brush for that. So I might use my round petite. I might smudge those a little bit actually. So I just got my brush slightly damp. I'm just kind of smudging those because my brush was a little too floofy. Okay. I like it. I like it. So let's go in with our darker color that we made. Get really like a nice, these tips are like very pointy. And again, don't overblend it. I promise you it's going to look better if you don't. I'm saying this as much for you as I am for myself, if I'm being honest. Like, that's my constant motto to myself is don't blend it, don't do it. Say it with me, folks. Don't do it. You're watching this around people, they're like, what is going on? Why are you chanting? Be that weirdo. Be it with me. Okay. Then I'm going to get, and so I'm just kind of looking around at some of that coloration, playing around with the colors that I'm mixing and matching. I found a lot of these colors I'm not even mixing up. I'm just finding them on my palette after all the fun color stuff that we have done in this painting. So let's see. And this kind of almost differentiates where some of the veins are as well. So I'm softening this up with a damp brush. Again, I don't I don't want to overblend it, so I'm trying to just leave it there. I'm creating the illusion of the vein by not painting in certain areas. Okay, nice. And got a little bit here. Okay. And this is kind of the fun part. Again, nature's not perfect, so it doesn't have to be perfect. There's almost a little bit of green in there, huh? So let's add, woo, been using my green up. Running out. I'm gonna add just like a little bit of green here. That looks really nice over that yellow. It's like, hey, I used to be green once upon a time. And since I already have my green wet, let's go ahead and there's like a little bit more in here. If we had been doing like super detail, we probably would have done some masking with this. So for folks who are joining in on the challenge, we are going to be doing some masking later this week. So I have, you should have gotten a link to some masking fluid if you don't already have one in your email. Masking is where you block off a certain part of your painting in order to allow the white of the paper to remain. So I'm saying here that I might have used some masking to make sure that this green was very, very bright. Instead, some of the yellow underneath is muting a little bit, but that's a-okay. I think it still looks great. Let's see. So I think we might, there's like a little bit of like some very light lines. It's just almost like just a little shadow of a line. Okay. Now we can get into this section here. There's a lot of really cool So get messy. Don't be too precious about your brushes. They will you can use them, you know, they're meant to be used. Don't worry if you're like, blah, 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 you know. It's the official term. Blah, 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 blah. But don't worry if you're like, you know, working them hard. That's what they're there for. So you can smush them a little bit. I'm just adding some texture. Let's add some of that dark part here. Love it. Oh, Anna said, oh no, are you okay? Oh, from when I was saying I was sick. Yeah, I'll be okay. You know, these kids just keep coming home from all their little camps and daycares and stuff. And they're so sick. My immune system was not prepared. You know, just a cold. I'm okay. Thank you for asking. All right. So do you see how we're avoiding painting where the veins are, and that kind of helps keep that essence of the veins happening there? Okay, let's add some more of that dark decay color to the tips here. Maybe a little bit right there. All right, I got a lot of it up in here. I feel like this part of the leaf could use a little more attention. All right. Some nice oranges in here. Really going hard. I feel good about it though. Now I'm just adding water because that was a pretty dark line. So I'm just adding water to that. Just splash some water on the page, and you know what? This is the perfect opportunity for that kind of action. We are okay with that. Let's see. Oh yeah, it's like, so some of my paint is a little bit granulating, and I've got some like cool little gnarly nuggets of like pigment over here. Granulating is where your paint is gonna look kind of like sandy almost, and I don't hate it. I'm kind of digging it, honestly. Let's see. Oh yeah, and I had this little folded leaf over here, so let's add a little bit of dimension. We've got like our little shadow there. And then let's see, get some more orange. Again, just being really playful. Let your brush just tickle the page. I feel like that's kind of a creepy way to describe it, but I don't know what else better describes it. You just give it a little tickle. Let's see. Okay. I'm just, working my way around this little cutie. Sometimes if your brush is really dry, you can really use the texture of the paper to allow some of the brush stroke to show like the texture of the paper. If it's really brushy, think about just kind of skimming over the top of it. All right. And now what's really interesting is now that I'm looking at this a little bit closer, like what have we been doing? Not looking at it closely, apparently. But this line here, it's a little bit red, but this one is actually almost yellow in the reference photo. So that's really interesting. It's not all red. So fun fact. And that's okay. I still think this looks good. But I will say, like, if you're doing something like, I don't know, like a pet portrait or something where it really needs to resemble the subject that you are using as a reference, I spend a lot of time just like looking at it and thinking in between each layer is like, okay, what's happening? Because once you start putting those layers on, you're really, it's a commitment. It's a commitment. Okay. I'm just adding a little bit more red to that tip here. Just want a little more pizzazz. All right. I am feeling pretty good about this little cutie. I'm going to add just a hint of depth more to this like stem here, just a little bit of that dark color that we mixed up, that like decaying color, just to give it a little bit of a shadow. But there we go. So we use the glaze technique to build up this leaf. We had the base layer, which was just a big wash, and then we did 2 layers where we did a little bit of a wet and wet and let it dry in between, and then we added our detail layer. So let me know if you have any questions. But for those of you still with us, I wanted to give you a little treatsy. So if you check out in our store, if you use this coupon, you will be able to get 10% off of the watercolor kits. So live treat, like trick or treat. And our kits are still priced at $38. So make sure we were like, yeah, we're raising prices and we just haven't gotten around to it. So our whoopsie is your gain. We've got a lot of fun kits in there. And we're gearing up for the holidays. So if there are some that you like, definitely snag them now. In the meantime, thank you so much. Don't forget to post and tag me if you're participating in the Fall for Watercolor Challenge. Oh, here, I'll put this here in case you keep thinking about it. In the Fall for Watercolor Challenge. And happy painting, my friends. Thanks so much for joining me today. I will see you tomorrow. Oh, I should look this ahead. Tomorrow I will see you. We are painting, what are we painting? A mushroom. And we are going to be talking about, what are we talking about? Who even knows? Oh, shading and shadows. So we talked about that a little bit here and there, but we're going to really dig into how we can use both the glaze and the wet and wet techniques to create shading and shadows. So thank you for joining me. It's going to be a juicy one tomorrow. Can't wait. All right. Bye.